The Cowboys' rookie offensive lineman shined on Saturday night, but was it enough to shake up the current depth chart, especially at the center position? We'll talk about that and more on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. I am your host, Landon McCool, and thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. I am your host, Landon McCool, and today's episode, we are going to talk about Trey Lance's improvement from week to week from this game on Saturday night in Vegas. We'll talk about other notes and news from the game that happened and some of the down roster folks that showed up as the starters did not play very much in this game on Saturday. But we have to start with the rookie offensive linemen and how they performed against the Raiders starters. Specifically, we have to talk about Cooper Beebe and Tyler Guyton. And let's start with Guyton. This was Guyton's first opportunity to get some real playing time, with the ones since Udoka's been injured. Obviously, he's been getting worked in with the first team, the training camp practices. He obviously got some snaps in the first week at left tackle, but due to this injury, the illness that he dealt with that kind of held him out with a couple of practices and all the other injuries that were happening at the tackle position, I was concerned that he may not get a lot of snaps in this game, that they may try to protect him, that they may, value the risk versus reward as not really worth it. As they had already lost, Bostic and Udoka, as I mentioned, and starting to get very thin at the tackle position. But I was wrong, and I was thrilled to be wrong because we got to see Guyton for more than a half of football, and I think it was probably the best that we've seen of Guyton so far. He got an opportunity to go against Max Crosby and some of the other starters in the Raiders line, and whether it was in pass protection where he was sealing guys off, moving guys off the ball, including Max Crosby in the run game, I thought Guyton looked fantastic, no matter where he was facing. Now, it wasn't always perfect. He definitely had some technique inconsistencies and kind of reverted back to some things, especially as the game went on. He started to get more and more tired. And so I think, game conditioning is obviously always going to be a problem with these rookies as they start getting closer and closer to the regular season. But I think for the most part, considering what he was able to do against who he was able to do it, you have to be thrilled with where Guyton is at this point. I think we were all very well aware that Guyton was going to be the starter after Udoka was injured. I don't think any of this is surprising, but I think what is exciting is to kind of get some confirmation on how he would look against a guy like Max Crosby or against the starters for a team like the Raiders. So it's just another hurdle, another step that Guyton has taken on his way to becoming the viable starter. And obviously he's got a lot more steps he's going to need to take because week 1 is going to be an incredible matchup for him, as we continue to mention, against Myles Garrett when they play Cleveland in September. But let's move on to Cooper Beebe, who is actually the guy that I feel like was the more surprising of the two rookie offensive linemen. Not that we didn't expect big things from Cooper Beebe. I think, when he got drafted, we had all kind of penciled him in as a starter. And I think that what was surprising was exactly how much pushback Brock Hoffman was able to give in this competition early. As Cooper was kind of working through some things and still trying to get used to snapping the ball and transitioning to being a blocker after snapping the ball, especially with the change in speed of the game. It took him a couple weeks to kind of get into this new speed with the new techniques that he's having to run, and also while snapping the ball. And I think that during that time, Brock Hoffman really took advantage and has been playing as the starter and really grabbed that spot by the horns and held on to it. And it hasn't really been until this last week or so that we've started to see Cooper Beebe not only get opportunities to be the starter or line up with the starters and take some snaps, but actually start to play up to a level that could garner him that starting position. I think there's, like we've mentioned, and I've gone on over and over on this podcast in these last few weeks, there are times when after the snap, it feels like Cooper is rushing too much to try to get into a blocking mode. He's reaching, he's bending at the waist, which, anybody who's heard us talk about offensive line play in the past knows that's a big no-no. You lose control, you lose balance by doing that. He's playing a lot more in himself, and then what that's allowing him to do is kind of unlock the things that we liked about his game. He's playing a more physical brand of football. I think you saw that early in the game when they ran that I think it was a inside zone to Malik Davis on like the first or second play that went for 9 yards. You saw Cooper Beebe secure the guy over to the right guard and then get to the second level to secure the second level block and really bury guys. And there's just 3 or 4 different plays where you're seeing him comfortably getting to the second level and burying guys or finishing blocks. And he seems to have gotten over the hump where he isn't thinking about it as much. He's actually just playing with himself, and it's becoming second nature. And I think that's the step in which you will start to see Cooper Beebe take this job from Brock Hoffman, is if he can kind of unlock that naturalness to this part of his game. I think that's the thing, is that he's clearly the more talented player. He's clearly the more athletic. He's clearly the stronger player. I think the issue at times has been, can he, feel comfortable enough that he can just go out there and play like naturally, like he normally would? Or is he going to be constantly still thinking about things and being kind of staggered as he's trying to make sure that all his footwork is correct and make sure that he's snapping the ball correct and that he's getting his hands up? It feels like it's all kind of, slowed down for him a little bit. And he's able to, operate with his techniques in a way where he's not, it doesn't look like he's thinking about it. It looks like it's smooth. He's reacting. He's able to be a reactive athlete, which is another thing. Is, as things happen in the line, there's lots of improvisation that has to happen. You got to be able to adjust on the fly. Things don't, play out exactly as they get drawn up on the board. So you have to be comfortable enough in your technique that you can improv on the fly. And I think that that's where he's starting to get to now, where he's starting to internalize a lot of this coaching a little bit more. He's not thinking about the snaps hopefully as much anymore, though we still are seeing some snap issues. That is something that he is going to have to continue to work on. But I think that as the snaps have gotten better, as the post-snap transition to a blocker has gotten better, we started to see that strength, that power, that nastiness that we all loved about his college tape getting unlocked in his game. And you saw it at several points during the game last night, finishing guys at the second level as a strong up front as a pass protector. And I think we should just, real quick comment on that whole left side was really good. We need to loop in Awesome Richards because he also had a really great game at the left guard. But just seeing Cooper Beebe, Guyton operate out there as the starters and feel comfortable is just a really good sign for the chances that they will both be the starter on week 1. Obviously, I think we can go ahead and write Guyton in there as a starter, but I also think after seeing what we saw last night, I'm starting to believe a little bit more now that Cooper Beebe is going to be able to take that job from Brock Hoffman even before the training camp session is over. And even before week 1 has rolled around, improvement is definitely the theme of the night last night. And I think no one exemplifies that more than what Trey Lance was able to do in this game, especially compared to where he was last week. Let's talk about Trey Lance on this next segment. And we got a lot of things to kind of dissect. And we'll do that when we come right back. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps our ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up for peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home some huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to US. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Thank you for making the Locked On Cowboys podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's talk about Trey Lance. Obviously after week one, there was a lot of hand-wringing over him and about his play. And he just didn't look like a professional quarterback. He has a long way to go. And I think a lot of that, the criticism obviously is very valid. He did look fantastic last week at different points. But I think that also the context here is that we need to realize where Trey Lance is in his development and where Trey Lance is in his career. He's a guy that has not had a ton of snaps. He didn't have a ton of snaps when he got drafted by San Francisco. It's not like he got a ton more snaps while he was with San Francisco. He spent some time injured. So Trey Lance is a guy that, is developing at an incredible rate right in front of our eyes. And I think where he is starting was a little bit further back than what Cowboys fans anticipated. And I think that has everything to do with the fact that it wasn't until last week that we even got to see Trey Lance really in a Cowboy uniform, outside of folks that saw him at training camp. So, but I think last night was a huge step forward. Let's just talk about the numbers real quick. He ended up being 15 to 23 with 151 yards passing with a touchdown. It's a 98.3 rating. He ended up also with 7 carries for 34 yards and adding another touchdown, including a 20-yard run. I think the big thing with Trey Lance is that in each one of these drives, even in the previous weeks, he at the very least was able to, move the ball and keep the offense going and run the offense, get him in and out of the huddle, changing run plays, making sure that they're in the correct looks for the plays. The issues that he's had have been about the mechanics of being a quarterback, right? There's accuracy issues, there's timing issues, and I think all of that, frankly, is tied into his footwork, right? Dak talks about all the time that his footwork is tied to the timing, is tied to the timing of the routes. And he always talks about listening to his feet in this system. And I think that's where Trey Lance has really kind of struggled at times, is that he's arriving at his marks a little bit late. He's getting through his progressions a little bit slower than he used to, because he's still kind of learning how to do it. And he's still kind of learning how 1, 2, 3 is supposed to go. And I think the timing of all that is still being worked out. You add in the fact that he's got all these other wide receivers that he's got to get used to. It's, he's playing with the first team, he's playing with the second team, he's playing with the third team. It's just all the wide receivers he's got to build some kind of rapport with. And it's a lot. And I think that it's not necessarily conducive to being a productive quarterback when you're having to kind of do all that at once. But I do think that Trey has taken some steps, and look, it may not have been a dominant performance of pinpoint throws down the field, but the fact that he's able to get the ball down the field and then put it into the end zone twice, I think that bodes well for his future as an NFL quarterback. He is still going to have to continue to develop his footwork. He's still going to have to develop that accuracy. He cannot be an NFL quarterback who can't throw the ball in the front of the numbers on a slant. He can't be an NFL quarterback who is high on more than half of his passes. But the idea that he can't get from where he is currently to that in an off season or maybe an off season and a regular season, I think that's untrue. I think he can get to where he needs to be, a starter level or a backup level quarterback. And I think the thing that's really interesting about Trey Lance is that, he has physical skills and tools that, once he gets to that point, he's going to level up very quickly. Like once he can get like a floor on his accuracy, on his consistency and technique, once his footwork is sort of ingrained a little bit more and becomes second nature, kind of like what we talked about with some of these other younger players, I think he will level up very quickly because of all the other things he has. He has the proper mindset. He's got he's a hard worker. He's got athleticism that can help him get out of terrible situations. And it's not even like we've mentioned, it's not even that he's just fast. He's big and strong. He can break tackles. He's not easy to bring down in the pocket. There are just a lot of kind of little things about Trey Lance's game that are that he has and he does very naturally, that if you can figure out how to unlock the accuracy and kind of, bring it all together in a more fundamentally sound package, I do think that Trey Lance is going to be a guy who could be a NFL quarterback that teams are going to want on their squad. I don't know if that ceiling ends as a high-end athletic backup, or if, or is he Marcus Mariota 2.0, or is he a guy who could develop into, that sort of elite arm strength athlete type of player who eventually kind of gets it and then has a Josh Allen kind of, growth eventually, obviously on a kind of different timeline. But that's what you talk about when you talk about these big athletic guys that are hard workers that have, elite arm strength. Those are the kind of comparables you can get to. But that's all to say that he clearly has a lot to clean up. But there's also a very serious and obvious reason why this team kind of continues to keep working on it, because all the things I just mentioned, the upside there is incredible, and you're just not easily going to find somebody with that level of upside. And B, I think if you've been in training camp, if you've watched these preseason games, you've seen marked improvement from Trey Lance every single day, every single, preseason game, all these reps. You've seen him getting better. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it is improvement. And I think that if you can kind of find a way to keep him around, to find a way to keep him as part of the squad, and I don't know what that looks like beyond this. Maybe they have to sign him to another cheap deal. I'm not sure, but I think that you eventually will get a guy that is at the very least a potential trade piece, but maybe even a guy that, a couple years down the road, if Dak retires or Dak gets to the end of this next contract that we hope he signs, maybe he's a guy that could be someone who is ready to take the reins at that point. But I do think that Trey Lance showed us something. And he showed us improvement as well. And I think those two things are reason enough to be excited about the fact that he's still here and that he's still part of the team. And that I'm excited to see what the next game brings for him and what the future brings for him. So kudos to Trey Lance. And that's all excellent. And he wasn't the only one who had some improvement. I got a whole notebook full of guys that feels like they had a lot of improvement in this game. Let's take a look at some of those folks that I had just quick notes on in our next segment, and we'll be right back, kind of discussing some younger guys who also caught my eye. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with YouTube TV Pace Plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Download America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every dayers. On tomorrow's podcast, we are going to discuss more of Saturday's game, while also checking in on training camp practice as Dallas finishes up their time in Oxnard. So be sure to check that out. And now for some notes on the game in Vegas. So I had lots of kind of just little notes on a bunch of different guys that I felt like played positive snaps that were at least worth commenting on. It was good to see. I want to kind of talk about the nickel spot real quick, and I had some notes on both Israel Mukuamu and Keemon Hall. Keemon Hall had a great pick six. He was a guy that I had mentioned at the end of the podcast a couple of days ago, who I thought like had actually shown us some other good reps at different points during the first game. And he was a guy that I had noticed a couple different times out in Oxnard while I was in training camp. He was picked up off of the waiver wire from San Francisco, if I'm not mistaken. And he's just a guy that they basically, since he's been here, has been playing almost exclusively in the slot. And obviously he had the pick six last night, but beyond that too, I just noticed a lot of physical play, a lot of decent coverage. And I also saw it from Israel Mukuamu too, who I think a lot of people were shocked to see playing so much nickel, but that's really what Mukuamu has been doing out at camp almost exclusively. It feels like, once everything kind of settled in with Bell back at safety, they made a conscious decision that Mukuamu was going to be one of the guys who would be sort of in competition for that nickel back role. And I think it's a great fit because he can, if you need him to, drop back and play some safety. He could be that guy that is kind of your game day swing defensive back, right? He can play a little bit of safety. He can play a little bit of inside nickel if you need him to. And I think that just having that kind of length on the field in the nickel spot, it's really tough for throwing lanes. It gives him a lot more cushion to kind of be wrong with his feet if he has to, because he can kind of make up with that length and keep up with the kind of quicker guys inside. But I thought that both of them had really good games. Both had physical play at the spot, which is going to be really required in this new system. So great day for both of those guys. Andrew Booth was another guy that I thought kind of showed up at different points early in the game. You saw him, and then and just to remind everyone, this is the guy that the Cowboys traded Nahshon Wright to Minnesota for, the former second-round pick. And early in the game, you saw him kind of get beat on a deep pass. It was a perfect throw. He wasn't like terribly out of position. It's just was a deep throw in which he was obviously the closest defender, and he did get beat. But outside of that, I thought he had a really good game. He was very physical coming downhill in zone. He's a sure tackler on the outside, which I think is a key thing for the Cowboys. And he's a guy that, he's consequential, and which I felt like Nahshon Wright was, and it feels like Nahshon Wright, you wouldn't even know he was on the field sometimes while he was on the field, which is good in some ways and is bad in some other ways. I think with Booth, it's the same thing, and it's also similarly good and bad, right? He's on the field when he has a long pass that he didn't defend, but you also know when he's on the field when there's an outlet pass to the flat, and it's with a tight end who seemingly has all this room to run, and suddenly Booth comes flying downfield and making a solo tackle on a bigger tight end to keep him to a 2 or 3 yard gain. Those are the kind of positive things we've seen. So not surprising, we're seeing a little bit of up and down from a young player, but like I've said, I think it's good that it's consequential. It's good that he's mixing it up and that he's part of this he's around the ball. He's making plays on the ball. I think these are all incredibly important things. So, it's nice to see these kind of guys show up and do something. I think if anything, my issue at times with Nahshon Wright is that, he was there, but you didn't really know it all the time, right? He would make deflections that the ball was thrown at him, but he wouldn't intercept the ball. He wasn't necessarily physical for being a bigger corner. And I think that that's what you're starting to see a little bit more with Andrew Booth. You're starting to see a guy that, is at least mixing it up and is making plays at full speed. He's at the very least, he's either going to miss or make the play, but he's going to do it very, very quickly. Let's talk about some other folks. I saw a couple of things from Liafu that I really liked. I love the way that he gets downhill when he sees it. When he sees the play playing in front of him, the ability to pull the trigger and just kind of teleport downfield into the tackle, into the ball carrier, is really, really impressive. And he's not, he's not a guy that necessarily tested incredibly well. So it is a little bit surprising to see him kind of be able to just with a burst like that, but it is impressive to see. And it's something that, it's why they started to kind of wear GPS guidance on these guys' pads, because I think sometimes there are guys who just play faster in pads and play faster than their 40 times would ever indicate. So, and I definitely think that Maris Liafu is definitely one of those. We got to talk about Jalen Cropper. It's just, it feels like he's making more negative plays than he is positive plays. He did have a little nice return at one point, but the fumble, the kind of just not being aware of where he is. He had another drop as well. We talked about how it feels like there are, 4 of these guys past Jalen Brooks that are kind of all vying for that wide receiver 6 spot. I mean, 5 is kind of default because it's definitely going to go to Turpin, but I think, that kind of potential last or 6th wide receiver has been a dogfight between all these different guys that have all the down roster guys, including Cropper and Flournoy and Durden. And it just feels like Cropper, more than the other guys, is trending in the wrong direction, right? Durden, you just haven't seen very much either way. Flournoy's actually had a touchdown in this game, did a couple different more positive things. So it feels like he's trending in the correct direction. It feels like Cropper is kind of picking the worst time to really sort of flounder and have some kind of boneheaded stuff. So that's a little bit concerning as far as his opportunities on the roster. I do think that another guy, Tyler Billy Johnson, didn't really see a ton from him either. He's another guy that, as we've been talking about, needing to kind of come out here and to make some plays in order to kind of make a move in this depth chart to kind of separate himself a little bit. I just don't feel like we saw very much of that. It feels like the guy that, if any one of these wide receivers potentially separated themselves at all, it would be Racey McMath or Ryan Flournoy. Not really any of these other kind of guys that we've been hoping would kind of step up and take the reins on that wide receiver 6 spot. And then finally, we've kind of come to see some more positive things from is Wanye Thomas, right? He's a guy that he really, really has every single practice, every single preseason game, he does something. And it's to the point now where you start to wonder how much these backup safeties are going to play. You've seen playmaking stuff from Bell. You've seen playmaking stuff from Thomas. How many more times are we going to see them kind of flash in the preseason before we start giving them more real opportunities in the regular season? And that's going to be something that I think is going to be an interesting thing to watch kind of going into the regular season. Is, have these young safeties done enough that you consider rotating them maybe a little bit more than you would have thought otherwise with the starters? So that's something I'm going to be keeping an eye on, is that as we see more and more playmaking from Marquise Bell and Wanye Thomas, do they get more and more opportunities with the first team to kind of, make plays and give guys like Hooker and Wilson an opportunity to rest a little bit more, especially as they continue to get older. That's it for us. Thank you for making Locked On Cowboys podcast your first listen today. Now, go listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast and get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategy so you can win your league this season. You can find the link on the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you guys check out and follow me on Twitter @McCoolBCB, and we will see you tomorrow.